Hello and welcome to Racing Through Canada's Past, the podcast where we journey through the rich and diverse history of motorsports across Canada. From the winding roads of British Columbia to the salty shores of the Maritimes, from the racetracks of Southern Ontario to the wild, untamed territories, this is the show where we dive deep into the heart of Canadian racing. I'm Jon Morrison, your host. If you listen to the True North Racing podcast before, you already know I've been involved in motorsports for over 2 decades. From crewing for late models, super stocks, mini stocks, and even some bone stocks, to transitioning into podcasting and social media coverage with JoMo Media Promotions in 2020, it's been quite the ride. But one thing that's always captivated me throughout the years is learning about the history of racing in Canada. We all know the iconic tale of NASCAR origins, the bootleggers and their moonshine fueled need for speed during Prohibition. But when it comes to Canada, the question is, when and where did motorsports truly begin? And that, my friends, is exactly what we're here to uncover. In this podcast, we'll explore everything from the origins of Canada's racetracks to legendary racers who helped shape the sport and the evolution of Canadian racing series over time. So buckle up because in today's episode, we're going to go back to where it all began, the first ever motorsports race in Canada. Picture this. The year is 1900. Canada's on the brink of a new century, and automobiles are still a fresh marvel to the public. Enter F.S. Evans, a man ahead of his time, known for his passion for cars and his role as a race promoter. Evans took his Panhard automobile on a historic journey from Toronto to Hamilton, a distance of about 40 miles or so, I guess it's about 60 kilometers, in a time of 3 hours and 20 minutes. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a casual drive down to the 403. Well, not quite. Back then, Dundas Street, the route Evans took, was no smooth highway. It was a rough, unpaved path, an incredible challenge for early automobiles. The fact that he completed the trip in such a time spoke volumes about the potential of the automobile, especially at a time when cars were still more of a novelty than a practical mode of transportation. But Evans wasn't just about long drives. He was a promoter and visionary. This event in 1900 marked the beginning of what would be a legacy of motorsports in Canada. And from this pioneering journey came the very first official race in the country. But what exactly was that first race and when did it take place? Let's dig into it. The first official race is commonly traced to 1901 with a speed trial that's been a point of contention among historians. There are several claims to the title of first race, each with a bit of a twist of the details. For instance, one of the earliest mentions is a race along Lakeshore Boulevard in Toronto on August 31st, 1901. Here, Harry B.M. Little, a true early motorsports enthusiast, piloted his Mercedes 35 horsepower to victory at a top speed of roughly 55 miles per hour. Little was driving at a blistering pace, and back then, that was nothing short of extraordinary. This race was a pivotal moment in Canadian motorsports history, showing the world just how fast these early cars could go. But the story doesn't end there. Later in the same year, on October 6th, 1901, another speed trial was held, this time in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Manitoba Automobile Club played host, and the winner was J.A.P. Goodhue, racing his locomobile. This event is often touted as the first official automobile speed trial in Canada, and it holds a special place in the hearts of racing historians. Not to be outdone, though, the very next day on October 7th, 1901, another race occurred, once again in Toronto, but with a different participant and organizers. As the days went on, Canada's motorsports scene began to take shape. Early races were not as polished as the ones we're familiar with today. There were no giant stadiums, no expensive sponsorships, just raw competition between cars and drivers with an insatiable hunger for speed. These events were vital in proving the practicality of the automobile and helped establish a foundation for Canadian racing. Another fascinating piece of history comes from Fort Erie, Ontario, where an event held by the American Buffalo Auto Club is sometimes listed as the first official race in Canada. Though details on this particular race remain scarce, it is another interesting point in the development of Canadian motorsports. What's important here is that racing wasn't just about speed. It was about setting the stage for the future. As the years rolled on, the sports evolved in tandem with the growing enthusiasm for automobiles across Canada. By the early 1900s, major exhibitions like the Canadian National Exhibition, or CNE, became hotbeds for motorsports, especially in Toronto. Imagine the scene. By 1913, drivers were participating in a wild sport known as auto polo. The next year, racing events began to feature more exciting formats like car hurdling. And yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Cars racing and jumping over hurdles, this early 20th century innovation was precursor to the bold and brave spectacles we see today in motorsports. In 1917, something even more daring occurred. Gaston Chevrolet, yes, you heard that right, one of the Chevrolet family members, raced against an airplane piloted by the famous aviator Ruth Law. Talk about the ultimate race. Cars and planes racing side by side. Incredible, right? By the time the 1920s rolled around, tracks like the CNA began hosting bigger races with impressive prize pools. And for a few years, it became the epicenter of racing in Canada. Not only were these events thrilling, but they also attracted some of the best drivers from across North America. And then we have some of the earliest Canadian drivers who made the waves south of the border. One standout is Peter Henderson from Fernie, British Columbia. In 1914, he joined the prestigious Board Track Series, which were early sprint cars. Just a year later, he competed in his first AAA race with the Duesenberg team, and in 1916, he finished second driving a Maxwell car. Henderson would eventually compete at the legendary Indy 500, finishing in the top 10 twice, first in 1916 and again in 1920. Henderson's success south of the borders helped put Canadian racing talent on the map. As racing in Canada evolved, the sport began to localize more. Tracks in Ontario, like the Western Fairgrounds and Essex, became some of the most frequented, wild purpose-built racetracks were popping up across the country in the 1940s. Many of these tracks were dirt at first, but as racing grew, they became paved, and some of the oldest tracks, like Delaware Speedway, are still running strong today. However, racing in Canada was still very much a regional affair. The creation of a national series faced challenges. It was difficult to match the scale of the U.S. racing or gain traction on the world stage. Yet this didn't stop Canadian racers from making their mark, and in more recent years, many Canadian drivers have turned to the U.S. and international circuits, including F1, where they've gone on to compete at the highest level. But that's a story for another time, one we'll cover in future episodes. But that is going to wrap up our first episode of Racing Through Canada's Past. I hope you enjoyed our quick dive into Canadian motorsports origins. Next week, we'll be heading out west to explore the fascinating motorsports of British Columbia. And I've already unearthed some incredible stories you won't want to miss. Be sure to follow JoMo Media Promotions on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube for more exciting motorsports content. Until next time, keep your engines running, and we'll see you guys in episode 2. See y'all.
You can find JoMo Media and Promotions on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and at jomomedia.ca. Until next time, keep your engines running and your belts tight.